I've been fascinated by the changes that have taken place in how the state of Oregon has begun to deal with some of the different aspects or products, if you will, that the state as a government has provided. And certainly tourism has been one of those areas in which there have been many exciting changes. Many of you may not know that through the lottery funds, the budget for marketing tourism in this state has more than doubled. Why would you spend all this money on tourism, you might ask? Well, it's our third largest business, tied with high tech, behind forest products and agriculture. It's a $1.8 billion a year business. It represents 37,000 jobs and a payroll of over $320 million. But until recently, there was very little in the way of marketing information that could identify who were these people coming to Oregon and how much were they spending and where were they going, what were their interests. For those of you that are in the communications business, these are just normal, everyday things that you would ask a company coming to you. But for a government, this is very unusual in an approach to say, you know, we should probably have this information. Why do you need information like that? Well, interestingly enough, the state of Oregon 5 years ago said that they had 14 million visitors in the year. Then they did this study this last year and found out that we'd had 6 million visitors. We're not sure where the other 8 million went. We hope they came to Oregon, but nobody knows for sure. Good baseline marketing data, in other words, was not available to identify who the target audiences were for a marketing campaign aimed at tourism, nor to point out to them what products they had available. Our speaker today is one of the reasons that all of these changes has taken place. Debbie Kennedy learned her profession while working at a small mom-and-pop footwear company called Nike. Prior to that, she spent some time at a small metals factory called ESCO. And since 1987, she has been the energetic leader of the Oregon Tourism Division, part of the Economic Development Department of the state of Oregon. Will you help me welcome Debbie with the shortest title that I've ever seen, called Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About the Oregon Tourism Marketing Campaign, Regional Strategies, and Product Development. Debbie Kennedy.
I did not write that title. Thank you very much, Bill. It is absolutely an honor to be here today, particularly for the annual meeting. And it's nice to see so many good friends in the audience, which only serves to remind me what a wonderful 2 years it's been for me since I started on as Oregon's tourism director. What I'd like to do today is share with you some of the exciting changes that have taken place in these past 2 years and take a look at how those changes will affect all of our futures here in Oregon. In January of 1987, Governor Neil Goldschmidt came into office, having been elected on what was primarily an economic development platform. The centerpiece of his campaign was the Oregon Comeback, and the newly elected governor's commitment was to ensure that the people of Oregon played an active role in making sure that the comeback came true. This was not to be another plan thrust upon the people of Oregon by politicians in Salem, but rather a comeback strategy of the people's own choosing. How did the governor go about making this work? Well, one of the cornerstones of the comeback was and is a program called Regional Strategies. Funded at the level of $25 million in the 87-89 biennium, the Regional Strategies program called for each county to select a strategy of choice for its economic recovery and long-term growth. County commissioners were placed in charge of the strategy selection process, a process which involved countless public meetings to assess local assets, determine common agendas for the common good, and to determine what steps needed to be taken to achieve these strategic goals. Counties were encouraged to join together in multi-county strategies, and through the unification of effort, many new bonds were formed, and many age-old competitiveness was replaced by a spirit of new cooperation and partnership. Some counties knew immediately which strategy they wanted to adopt, and for others there was a considerable amount of soul-searching involved. Coos County, for example, wanted to optimize its deep draft international port, and so immediately began pursuing a strategy of maritime trade. Similarly, the 3 counties in Central Oregon, Deschutes, Jefferson, and Crook, knew that they wanted to continue with what was already a key to their economy, which was tourism. Obviously, with timber and agriculture as Oregon's top 2 industries, strategies based on these 2 industries were considered by many and adopted by counties such as Marion and Polk, Morrow and Umatilla, Hood River, Malheur, Union and Wallowa, and Harney and Lake. But what was surprising even to me is that 2/3 of Oregon counties chose tourism as their strategy. Suddenly, through the Regional Strategies Program, a state whose previous highest tourism budget was $2.5 million was looking at a situation where they were investing $20 million of state funds in tourism product development and marketing, and the majority of it going to product development for everything from boat ramps to major attractions. But what's even more amazing is that this $20 million was leveraged to a total of $174 million in other funds for these tourism projects, an incredible amount. A strategy's ability to leverage additional dollars was one of the governor's major criteria for judging its viability, and clearly these figures indicate that these tourism strategies had met the test. Another criteria was whether or not the strategy had multi-county regional applications. If we look at which strategies had the largest numbers of participants, again, it's the tourism strategies. The Central Oregon Alliance comprised of 8 counties in Northwest Oregon, the 4-county Southwestern Oregon Tourism Strategy, 3 counties in Central Oregon, and 5 counties in North Central Oregon. Each have achieved outstanding synergy by pulling together their resources in their strategies of choice. This surge in investment, coupled with increased media coverage of Oregon tourism, has some legislators in Salem scratching their heads and asking themselves some questions. Is this level of investment really smart? Does tourism produce only minimum wage jobs? Were these strategies carefully thought out, or was tourism simply an easy strategy to pick because most people understood it? What I'd like to do today is spend some time answering these questions for you, explaining to you which new tourism facilities are being built through these programs, how the state is marketing itself, and allow this group to decide for yourselves whether or not you think this course is a good one for our state. Let's start with the product. You should know that the majority of Oregon's visitors come by car from our neighboring states, California and Washington, with the Sunbelt states of Arizona, Texas, and Florida following behind. Our research indicates that 85% of our visitors come here for our scenic beauty. So in terms of product, the single most important thing that we can do to ensure a strong tourism industry is to be certain that we never allow anything to destroy our state's beauty. We have all learned a lesson from the Valdez disaster. No man-made attraction can ever replace Oregon's natural beauty. So I believe it makes sense for us to focus on enhancing or interpreting what nature has already given us in spades. Along this line, the first such product that I wanted to mention to you is the exciting new aquarium in Newport. This 32,000 square foot facility, due for completion of Phase 1 in late 1991, is located on Yaquina Bay in the Central Oregon coast. Exhibits will trace a drop of water from the coastal mountain range to the estuary and finally into the tidal pool. Part aquarium, part zoo, and part resource education center, this new aquarium in Newport is certainly not just another fish tank. Unlike other aquariums that focus on tropical fish, this project will include a look at an ecosystem that is uniquely Oregon. Visitors to the aquarium will come away with a new appreciation of the geology and the wildlife of one of the most beautiful coastlines in the world. And remember, when I say visitors, I do mean those Californians and those Washingtonians, Japanese and Germans, but I also mean you and me and your kids and mine. Aside from scenic beauty, our research indicates that Oregon's rich history is another key draw for visitors. On the other side of the state, in Baker County, a project is being planned through regional strategies that has the potential of being one of the most exciting tourism attractions in the state. Plans call for a $6 million center off I-84 to interpret and document life on the Oregon Trail. The drama associated with life and death on the trail that carried the largest mass migration in American history is a story that is so basic to Oregon's heritage that it seems criminal to me that heretofore the only existing Oregon Trail Interpretive Center is located in Independence, Missouri. The Baker facility proposes to present a living history of life on the trail. A recent report from the Governor's Oregon Trail Advisory Council further envisions a center in Pendleton documenting trail pioneers' contact with the Umatilla and Cayuse Indians, a center in the Dalles showing the transfer of the weary travelers' goods onto rafts for the final leg of their journey downriver, and finally a center in Oregon City, the end of the trail that would reflect formation of the new government and the establishment of life in the Willamette Valley. Should we let our story be told in Independence, Missouri? I think not. And again, as economic development tools, these projects can be great for bringing in the lucrative tourism business, but their greatest contribution is to our own children, whose understanding of their own heritage will make them more productive adults. A third project, being funded in part by regional strategies, is of course Portland's new convention center. Slated to be the largest convention center in the Pacific Northwest, this new facility will bring tens of thousands of visitors to our state for business purposes. But by coordinating our tourism marketing efforts, these people will hopefully extend their stay and visit our new regional magnets: the Newport Aquarium on the coast, the new Columbia Gorge Interpretive Center, the Oregon Trail Interpretive Center in Baker, the new exciting new wing at the High Desert Museum in Bend, the new North American Animal Park at Wildlife Safari in Douglas County, and of course back to Portland to fly out of PDX, but not without stopping to see the new wing of the Oregon Historical Society. Quite an exciting array of what I think will be very high-quality products that are consistent with Oregon's unique personality. But many of these projects are 2 to 5 years away from completion. In the meantime, the Tourism Division is busy making sure that tourists come this year and next year to enjoy the best attractions that we will ever have, our spectacular scenery. As you probably know, about 18 months ago, the Tourism Division launched a new campaign for the state, and a new slogan, "Oregon, Things Look Different Here," was adopted. Many have asked if this slogan is working. Well, let me tell you a story. About 2 weeks ago, the governor received a letter from a young schoolgirl in California, and she asked for 3 things. First of all, she wanted some travel information about Oregon, a normal request. Secondly, she wanted an autographed picture of the governor. And thirdly, she wanted a sample of the kind of money we use here. What does that tell you about this campaign? Seriously, this last year has been really great for us, and from a marketing standpoint, we've had what I think are some big successes. Let me just take you back over the last year in tourism marketing. This was the cover of the centerpiece of our spring kickoff last year, and the headline says, "We've been saving a place for you," which I think sort of sets the tone for our whole campaign. It's an invitation, but it's also a statement about our attention to maintaining our environment. Inside this insert, we saw spreads like these: "Sometimes the best place to find yourself is where no one else can." And that's precisely the reason why Californians are coming here, to find this. This one here, "When it's man versus nature, who says both sides can't win?" I think differentiates in part this tourism campaign from others. We think our mission is larger than to just sell tourism. We think we need to sell the whole state, and this ad, I think, sells our business environment equally as much as it sells our tourism environment. And this one here, "Bring the American Express card, we no longer accept beaver pelts," I think was meant to address the fact that things have changed a little bit in Oregon since those days of the Oregon Trail 150 years ago. This billboard accompanied the campaign and was located on an on-ramp. We only paid for one of these billboards because we still, despite the increases, don't have a huge budget. This one billboard was placed on an on-ramp onto a crowded San Francisco freeway. And the thing that's most exciting is that a photographer took a picture of this billboard with cars gridlocked behind it. and sent it out over the Associated Press wires, and it ran as a news item in 40 newspapers across the country on the business page with a caption that said, "Oregon rubs it in." And this was the companion board that says, "Another crowded beach." When we launched this campaign, we rented Union Square in San Francisco for 2 days and handed out a lot of Christmas trees and Oregon travel guides and talked to a lot of people at the same time. And one of the things that we heard, much to our dismay, was that the concept of visit but don't stay is still very much out there. So we came back to the office and thought about that for a few minutes and said, what can we do to convince people that Oregonians really are friendly? So we started this campaign. This was an insert that went into many of your utility stuffers that invited you to have the governor write a personal letter to a friend or relative of yours out of state and have them come visit. Well, we really had no idea what to expect from this, and much to our amazement/horror, 50,000 Oregon families decided that they wanted the governor to write to their friends, and they actually wanted them to come visit, which resulted in several interesting scenarios for the tourism department, but I think even more importantly, some interesting scenarios for the governor, who suddenly had 50,000 people out of state thinking that he was best friends with their relatives. He got letters inviting him to the family wedding, to the family picnic. He had one lady run up to him when he was in a meeting in Newport on the coast and fling her arms around him and say, "I got your letter and I came." But my very favorite of all was the guy who took the governor's letter and in disgust scrawled across the top, "You forgot my birthday, you didn't send me a Christmas card, and now you want me to visit." He's got a lot of new friends. In June of last summer, we launched our new wildlife viewing guide in cooperation with several other state agencies and private sector organizations. I want to be quick to point out that this owl has horns and not spots. And this effort was something that the Tourism Division was very proud of, because part of our charge by statute is to come up with ways to provide seasonal and geographic balance to our tourism product. And that is exactly what wildlife viewing allows us to do. It is also the third most frequently requested item on our reply cards for further information. Last fall, we launched this new winter marketing campaign. We ran 18 different ads featuring 18 different fun and crazy events around the state. This one announced the new Shakespeare Festival coming to Portland, "Wherefore art thou this winter?" This one was for the ever-popular sled dog races in Sumter, "Come if you mush." And this one, I can't read this one. This is for the Llama Fair in Grants Pass. Last winter, we launched a first ever national public relations effort, and I made the maiden voyage to New York and Washington, D.C. to talk to travel writers from publications like Vogue and Glamour, GQ, USA Today, National Geographic, and they were all surprised to hear from Oregon, but they were all also very happy to hear from Oregon, and I think that we're going to see a lot of additional press coming out about our state over the next several years. This was a package that we mailed as a follow-up to the travel writers that we called on and to an additional list of others that we had targeted. And there's some gifts in here, but most importantly, the binder on the left contained about 30 story ideas about different things that they could write about that were uniquely Oregon. And as part of this effort, the division was proud to help facilitate this cover of Ken Kesey on United Airlines In-Flight magazine in March, which I don't know how many of you saw it, but was really a beautiful 18-page coverage of our state. The end of all this frenetic activity in 1988, I think, was rather gratifying. We found that taking a look back at the results for the year, our Welcome Center visits at our 10 state border welcome centers were up 26%. Room tax revenues from hotels statewide were up an average of 15%. And inquiries in the office in Salem were up a frightening 102%. It was, in fact, the best year in Oregon's tourism history. For this spring, we've taken some of the most successful messages from the 1988 campaign and added to them. This one here, and these are a little bit difficult to read, so I'll read you the headlines. This one says, "In Oregon, it's the people that are spoiled. not the places. This one says the deepest canyon in North America is a bit further north than you probably thought. And this ad was designed to dispel some images that Oregon is coastline and drippy Douglas firs and nothing else. We told them in the copy on this ad about some of the high deserts and spectacular scenery in the eastern part of the state. This is my personal favorite, a new twist on a fishing ad. It says, in Oregon, here's what we dump in our rivers. And is obviously a page stopper when you're turning the pages of Los Angeles Magazine. And finally, this one that says, in Oregon, you could be quite happy eating things you find along the side of the road. You can see, I think, both from the preceding fish ad and from this one, that we're trying very hard in all of our tourism efforts to incorporate some of Oregon's other products other than just scenery. We see it as partly our role to help the Fish and Wildlife Department and the Department of Agriculture promote what we think are some pretty unique offerings on Oregon's part. As part of some of the regional strategy programs, several of the areas have chosen to spend some of their money on marketing in lieu of total product development strategies. In Southern Oregon, they're running ads in Sunset Magazine. This one says, life begins at 40 miles an hour. And you'll notice that these all fit in exactly with the state's campaign in terms of design format. And this is in order to give people that are looking at our publications the impression that it's one huge campaign. The biggest difference between the state's campaign and the regional campaigns is that the state's messages tend to be philosophical and attitudinal, and the regional campaigns tend to talk about destinations. And this second one, belonging to Southern Oregon, says, well, Southwestern Oregon has no amusement parks. You can still find plenty of thrill rides. And finally, this ad for the Northwest Oregon Tourism Alliance, it says the United States is now available in a condensed version, and talks about the fact within 1 hour radius of Portland you can have everything from mountains to valleys, vineyards, and ocean. All of these ads are accompanied by a reply card that looks like this. These are stitched into the center of the ad, and it allows the respondent to select and ask for more information about one of Oregon's 6 regions or several special interest areas like arts and theater, museums, wildlife viewing, etc. This year to date, we have had 116,000 of these cards come back to Salem, which represents a 54% increase over last year. And you'll remember that last year was 102% over the year before, so you can imagine what's happened to our postage machine and things like that. Most of these requests, well, in fact, all of the requests will be sent out the state travel guide, which were on your places when you came in today at the table. But this reply card allows several of the private sector organizations marketing tourism throughout the state to order mailing labels that pertain to these special interests for people that inquired about their area, and they can follow up with additional information. This is also an inexpensive way for us to do some market research to determine relative levels of interest in the state's various regions and attractions. The reason that it's so important to us to generate these inquiries is that our research has shown that if we get the state travel guide into the hands of a potential visitor, 55% of them will end up making the trip to Oregon. And for those who had already made the decision to visit, we have found that getting them the state travel guide extends their stay by an average of 3 days, which of course has great economic impact on our state. Finally, on the subject of wages, this industry has been plagued by accusations of providing only low-income jobs. But we have recently completed some research that shows that tourism does not do just that. Yes, some of the jobs are entry-level. In fact, tourism nationwide as an industry is the single largest employer of women and minorities. It also provides important seasonal jobs for college students and young people. But as an industry, I do not believe that we should be apologizing for these jobs, but rather be proud of the fact that we have a key role in providing a training ground for many transferable skills for people entering the workforce. In addition to these entry-level jobs in Oregon, we find that 70% of Oregon's tourism businesses are in fact proprietor-owned and operated with an annual salary level of $32,000, and this is obviously a very respectable number. In fact, only 10% of Oregon jobs are at a minimum wage level, with 90% above that. Tourism in Oregon is clearly entered a new era. The state's third largest industry is also the state's fastest growing industry. But even with our record-breaking 1988, Oregon tourism numbers still represent less than 1% of the total tourism business. I think that the current levels of investment, though somewhat startling in the increase they represent, will serve only to help us catch up in what is a highly competitive market. Tourism joins timber and agriculture today to form the third leg of a three-legged stool to ensure a more stable, recession-proof economy. Our goal at the state level is twofold. First, to facilitate and assist in tourism product development that enhances our scenic beauty, and secondly, to market the state with intelligence, with humor, but at the same time with a sensitivity to our role as stewards of one of the most beautiful places on earth. We are finding that the same messages that appeal to our visitors also appeal to businesses seeking to escape the clutter and congestion of their present locations. They too want a place where it's the people that are spoiled, not the places. They too want a place where it's fish, not garbage, that are dumped in the rivers. They too want a state where it's man and nature that can both win. By protecting our state's wonderful natural and scenic resources, Oregon can achieve its vision of economic diversity without changing the characteristics that make it such a desirable place to live, to work, and to visit. Thank you.
We now enter the question portion of our program. If you have questions of Debbie, that right is reserved to City Club members. If you have a written question, I assume we have the forms on the tables and the microphone is being put out to the middle of the room. The first question will be asked by our former president, Phil Bogue. Phil?
I was set up.
That was a marvelous presentation, Denny, so I'm not going to ask the question that I was thinking about, and that is, what effect are all these tourists running through our forest lands going to have on the mating spotted owl? Well, anyway, the question I do have is this. I've been reading about this marketing program, and it obviously is tremendous, and you can see that today. Are we perhaps running a risk of such a strong program, which is going to bring in a tremendous increase in the number of tourists, without a comparable increase in the tourist infrastructure in terms of highways, motel rooms, particularly spots at our state parks and so on? Are we really prepared to handle this kind of an onslaught without having a lot of people going home and say, wow, they just can't handle this in Oregon?
Well, when I mentioned that there was $20 million being invested in tourism currently, I also mentioned that that $20 million had leveraged an additional $174 million. And let me explain that $174 million is being used for exactly that. It addresses issues about infrastructure. It improves our highways and improves all the facilities that we need to manage a larger tourism industry.
Yes, sir.
I have kind of a follow-up question. My name is Jim Zera, member of the club, and I was a member of the subcommittee that worked on the City Club's tourism report that was part of the economic development study we did a couple years ago. My question is a little different, I think, and I want to know if anybody in your part of state government and the department in general is concerned about sort of the carrying capacity of our state, not so much in terms of infrastructure, but just in terms of those beautiful scenes with the person fishing with nobody else around. If you get enough tourists, at some point you have people around everywhere. I used to live in Minnesota, and there are lakes in Minnesota where you just you can't get access. And we kick this around a lot in our work, and while this is wonderful stuff and we were hoping that the state could gear up like this, another theme of our report was that we should never lose sight of the fact that we need to preserve what we have that's so unique, as you've said, and I'm just wondering if there's any kind of feedback loop in all of this that asks, at what point do we have enough tourists, or is it so far in the future that we don't even need to talk about it? It's kind of the doom, the gloom, don't visit here specter risen again, but it seems to me our concern is we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Sure.
And I'm concerned about it, and I'm wondering if anybody in the tourism division is as well.
Yes, we are, and the governor just took us all through a long-range strategic planning process, and tourism was one of the industries that participated in this process. And we identified some changing roles for the tourism division. I think historically, nationwide, tourism divisions have been marketing organizations. And the change that the governor's new strategic plan recommends is the addition of some staff in the Economic Development Department to manage tourism product development with this point in mind. How do we control it? How do we make sure that we don't do what we shouldn't do as far as our natural scenery, et cetera? So I think we're all very aware of it, but I also come here from having lived for several years in Europe, where France and Germany and England, all of which are geographically not much bigger than Oregon, have each populations of 55 million, and in Oregon we have just over 2. So I think we do have some room for growth. As I mentioned, we still represent only 1% of the national tourism business, but we're cautious and careful in thinking about it.
I'm Charlotte Kennedy. As Debbie knows, I work for an organization that brings many people from other countries here, and I must say, have found out that people in Africa and Latin America have heard about staying away from Oregon and are surprised that they were invited here. I'm wondering about overseas marketing, to what extent it's being done, to what extent it's being contemplated, and how, in fact, we leapfrog some problems I'm aware of, that is, better informing travel agents overseas in particular about the fact that people are welcome here, and there are many opportunities for things that people, particularly from Western Europe, would like to take advantage of.
Well, I think it's interesting to note that our research that we completed recently that Bill alluded to earlier tells us that 95% of our tourism business now is domestic. Of that 95%, of the 5 remaining percent, all but slightly less than 1% of it come from Canada. So in terms of the Japanese market, for example, which we hear about all the time, and which in fact the tourism division is focusing on, it still represents less than 1% of our business, and we probably devote somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 20% of our time in sort of skimming off that 1%. So it's something that I think about frequently, is in terms of where our resources best utilized as far as marketing dollars and personnel. I think I've been on more trade missions to Tokyo in the last 2 years than I have to Los Angeles or San Diego, which doesn't really, to me, make a lot of sense. On the other hand, the Japanese market is the market that I'm most familiar with currently, because we have felt a commitment to helping Delta market this destination and keeping their planes full, which we are. So we as a state participate in a number of trade shows and marketing efforts in the Japanese market. In the European market, we are an active member of a group called Visit US West, which is an 8-state consortium, Western states that market themselves together primarily in the form of a collateral piece that's distributed throughout the U.S. travel and tourism offices in Europe. But I know that the Port of Portland is currently very busy seeking some direct service into Europe, and the moment they are successful in accomplishing that, our strategy with regards to Europe will change overnight, I think. We will feel the need to show the level of commitment to that new carrier that we currently feel to Delta.
I'm Don Sterling, a member. I think maybe you've just answered my question, but it's a slightly different version of Charlotte's. Having recently had a little experience in Europe myself, where I was grateful for every scrap of travel information I could find that in a language I could read, I wonder if we do enough to provide, even to that small percentage of our visitors here, literature in their own languages to show them around Portland and show them around Oregon.
No, I don't think we have done enough. Our primary piece that comes out of the tourism division now is the state travel guide. We also produce twice a year an events calendar, and we produce an accommodations guide. But as far as foreign language pieces, we have our Visit US West collateral piece, which is printed in English and in Japanese. And the only other pieces we've ever done have been in Japanese. I think until such time as the legislature indicates to us how we are going to be funded in the next biennium, it will be unclear to us how much of that we'll be able to do. It seems to change daily.
Ray Polani, a member of the City Club. You know, if we want to have Oregon continue to look things different here, I think we got to look long range too. And I'd like to ask, what are you planning for market more public transit? I'm thinking of trains and buses and local transit too, of course. You know, if we want to continue to say Oregon gridlock and we've been saving a place for you and all of that stuff, I think we should be beginning to plan for a switch.
I agree, and I'm very relieved to tell you that my job is to get them here, and it's ODOT's job to get them around. Because I wouldn't know what to do. No, in all seriousness, I know that the Department of Transportation has the Access Oregon plan, which is designed specifically for making parts of rural Oregon more available to tourists. And it is, in fact, rural Oregon that we're marketing in large part through our campaign. Currently, our research indicates that 60% of our visitors come to the coast and 60% come to Portland. So I sort of envision them driving up the coast and then swinging into Portland and going back down again. So from tourism traffic viewpoint, that is where most of the congestion lies. And I know that ODOT currently is enacting a new Highway 101 revision plan. But I think what we need even more badly is some more rural airports. I think it's criminal that you can't get to Wallowa Lake without spending, 11 hours in the process. And a number of areas of the state that are exactly what we're marketing aren't very accessible at the moment.
You know, I would like to offer a variation to Tom McCall. Bring yourself, but leave your car at home.
Alan Oliver, member. Many regions and cities have reached a new level of tourist dollar, bringing in tourist dollars by hosting international expositions or fairs. Is there anything in Oregon's plans along these lines?
Yes, there are. There are 2 or 3, and I'll tell you about all 3. The third one is sort of up in the air. The first one is in 1992, the Oregon Historical Society is leading the charge on a celebration of Captain Gray's discovery of the mouth of the Columbia, which further envisions on the part of Mayor Clark's office a flotilla of ships coming up the river that would be sort of like a floating trade show that would incorporate artifacts from museums overseas and items for sale. And then in 1993, the Tourism Division will definitely be involved in putting on a statewide celebration of the 150th anniversary of the Oregon Trail, which, although the trail really follows a very particular route, I think can in fact be a celebration for the whole state. One of the ideas that we're exploring that I'm particularly excited about is something that was originally done in the state of Tennessee, and they called it the Tennessee Homecoming. And they did it in 1986 and spent 4 years in the planning. And what they did was they had every town in the whole state of Tennessee have all-class reunions, and they had everybody write to their friends and relatives and say, come back for homecoming. And they had a train that went all the way across the state and a musical show that celebrated Tennessee's history through song and dance. They had celebrity guests, I think it was Alex Haley and Minnie Pearl. That the TV cameras followed them back home again. And I think it would be a lot of fun to put a spin on that Tennessee idea and have some sort of an Oregon Trail homecoming statewide celebration. In Tennessee, it was taken, I think, a step further. It was a great idea. In order for each community to become an official homecoming community, they had to meet 4 criteria. They had to research their heritage, number 1. Number 2, they had to create a vision for their future. Number 3, they had to have a homecoming celebration of some sort and a homecoming project, like repainting all the buildings on Main Street or planting trees or whatever. And what it did for the medium and small-sized towns was encourage tourism. It brought people back that hadn't been here for a long time. And it also sort of engendered some healthy competition, I think. And I'd love to see Oregon do something like that, but at the moment it's a fantasy, not a reality. So.
Don Barney, member of the club. Debby, that was an exciting report. One of the most interesting things is it sounds like the regional strategies, at least for tourism, is really working. If this is the case, and that may come as a surprise, particularly when you think of the disparate counties and communities in the Northwest Oregon group that's involved here. If it is working, what are some of the secrets with some of the bait that you're using to get those communities and all the different folks in this area to work together?
Well, I don't really think that we can say that the state did it. I think the counties did it themselves. I think, as I mentioned in my prepared remarks, I think the governor's concept was to have it be a strategy of the people's own choosing, and I feel confident that that's really what it was. And I think that in this Oregon Tourism Alliance region, which incorporates 8 counties, including the city of Portland and all the way out to the coast, I think the whole group got together and saw the convention center as a fabulous opportunity to draw people on the one hand here as a magnet in the city, and then another item like the Oregon Coast Aquarium on the coast as the magnet on the other end of the 8-county region, and pull people back and forth in between with loop tours and tours of the wine country, etc. So I think in most cases, again in the case of the 3 counties in Central Oregon that were already in good partnership together, it's been a joining together of their own choosing. Now that I'm not saying that it wasn't without some difficulties and fights and interesting moments, but I think that one of the most important products of the Regional Strategies program is not the buildings and not the marketing, but the new partnerships.
We have several written questions. I'm sure she'll love this first one. Do you favor having tourists help us by paying a sales tax as our neighbors do?
I could have gone all day without that question. Actually, personally, I do. I believe that Oregon needs a sales tax. I've been in favor of it for a long time, and I'm just glad I'm not a politician trying to get elected on that platform.
This question is probably been partially answered, but it's kind of curious. Are there any, quote, hopeless, unquote, areas in the state insofar as tourism are concerned?
I could go all year without answering that question. Well, there was a region of the state that I wasn't sure what to do with, I have to admit. And you can all guess what that was. But I took a drive from Lakeview to Burns. Actually, I went a lot further than I went all the way around the whole state. But what I discovered is that there are areas over in that, there are attractions over in that part of the state that are so unique and so remarkable that I cannot believe that they are not flooded with visitors. For example, the Malheur Field Station in Malheur County that has the single most fascinating bird migration anywhere probably in the world. People come from all over the world to see it, but so few people know it's there. And it's just a question of marketing. I have to tell you a funny story. This is a digression, but when I left on this trip, a friend of mine who knows that area pretty well said, "You're going by yourself?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "There's no radio over there." And I said, "Oh, well, what do you think?" And he said, "I think books on tape." So I said, "Fine, give me something. You've got a lot of them." So the first day I pulled out of actually Bend, I think, and I started south towards Lakeview, and I put the first tape in the oven, and in the player, and I heard Lady Chatterley's Lover by D.H. Lawrence, Book 1. And I thought, this is going to be bizarre. And it was.
There's been a tremendous amount of growth that you've described here in the tourism activities. Does the state or does your division do any long-range planning in terms of what-if situations? What if the growth continues at this rapid rate? How do we manage it? And what if, on the flip side, if there is an economic downturn and we get fewer tourists, how do we manage that part, having raised everyone's expectations?
Well, I think we will continue to get more tourists. Even if we stopped marketing completely, the fact that we're contiguous to the 5th largest economy in the world, containing a lot of people who are desperate to get out, I think, I think means that we're going to have growth no matter what we do. I think if we even stopped all the marketing tomorrow, we'd still have some growth. But in terms of what we're going to do if we have an economic downturn and tourism stops, I think one thing that's interesting to note is that I was talking recently with the publisher of Sunset Magazine, and I was ripping my hair out over the increases in gas prices, and I said, I hope this doesn't ruin our summer. And he said, you know, it's very interesting that Sunset had done a nationwide study of the last gas price problem, whenever that was, in the late 70s. And they found that Westerners did not stop traveling, even though people in the East and in the Midwest did greatly decrease their travel. And he said Western travelers are committed to their vacations, absolutely. And very little will interrupt that. And I think, you know, what you might see is a change from the fly, drive, go to the resort vacation back to the load the kids in the car type of vacation. But I don't think people in the West will stop traveling even if there is a downturn. The eternal optimist.
What are you doing to market Oregon to Oregonians?
Well, first of all, the ads that you see today are running in West Coast publications like Sunset that get delivered to Oregonians just like they do to everyone else. Our Tourism Advisory Council has given us a tourism marketing plan that says market to out-of-staters in the summer and primarily to Oregonians and Washingtonians in the winter. So the winter events campaign that I showed you earlier was targeted primarily at Oregonians. I think this industry, as you heard earlier, is large. It represents 37,000 employees and is the third largest industry in the state, and that creates a fairly large constituency base. And one thing that's been very gratifying to me is I think the pride that I see in other Oregon tourism participants in the campaign, the buy-in to the campaign, the adoption of our logo type and our graphic style, and I think a statewide effort to support what seems to be working.
One last question. What is your budget this year and what is it next year? And perhaps you could elucidate on where those funds come from, whether they're general fund or lottery money. And if you could get more, would you ask for it? And do you have any suggestions of how we might pay for that part of it?
Currently, our budget is $4.5 million. That is on the biennial basis. And of that $4.5 million, $2 million are lottery and $2.5 million are general funded. We have asked for a budget of $5.5 million for the next biennium, the governor's budget, $3 million of which would be lottery. And again, that changes daily whether or not we're going to get it. I think the legislature, the Ways and Means Committee, is in the process of deciding that right now. What some other states have done to ensure a more stable tourism budget so as not to be subject to a drop in lottery receipts or whatever, they have enacted a statewide room tax of varying levels, but in some states it's in the neighborhood of 1%. And our Tourism Strategic Planning Committee took a look at what would happen if we enacted even a 0.5% tax statewide on room tax so that our visitors help us pay for the marketing campaigns that brought them here, and discovered that it would add significantly to our budget and allow us to be almost independent of the lottery funds.
I hope you will all join me in thanking Debbie Kennedy for a fascinating presentation. Before everybody runs away, let me tell you that next week we have Neil Pierce, who is a syndicated columnist and prominent urban affairs expert. He will speak to a club in a joint meeting with a special conference organized to start a year-long process evaluating Portland's civic infrastructure. I'd like to thank everyone for showing up more or less on time in our first new time slot and remind you that again we will begin at 12:15 next week. We are adjourned, and at the Hilton Hotel, by the way.